The story of this serial killer can shock you with its violent details. He spent $100,000 to build his torture van and traveled around America to look for women to subject them to extremely excruciating pain and suffering. His girlfriend and his daughter helped him to torture and kill his victims, and the police couldn't find them for over 40 years. His name is David Parker Ray. He's one of the most violent mass murderers in history. David Parker Ray was born on November 6, 1939, in the American city of Belen, New Mexico. There isn't a lot of information about the torturer's childhood. Both he and his sisters were raised by their grandfather, but the boy often went to see his father, who beat him up on a regular basis. His father also gave him adult magazines that featured content with sadist undertones, which could affect the murderer's future inclinations. When Ray was a teenager, he was bullied by his classmates because he acted shy around girls. Initially, he found his comfort in alcohol and later turned to heavy substances. The future killer was already thinking about torturing and murdering women while he was still in school. One time, Ray's sister found his drawings where he vividly illustrated all of his fantasies. After graduating from high school, the boy joined the army. Later, Ray had 4 marriages, but none of them worked out in the end. He had 2 children. Ray's daughter became his accomplice and helped him commit his horrendous crimes. It's not easy to pinpoint the moment David Parker Ray decided to go on his killing spree. The police think that his criminal career might have lasted for 50 years. And all this time, it's not even that he couldn't be found. The investigators didn't even know that a serial killer was operating right under their very noses. The police got wind of his activities only when one of his victims managed to escape. On March 22, 1999, a police department in Elephant Butte received a call from people living in a trailer. They said that a weird young girl basically crawled into their place. The police officers who came to the location were shocked at the sight of her. Later, Officer Jones admitted that she was the strangest girl he'd ever seen during his 24-year-long career as a police officer. It turned out to be 22-year-old Cynthia Vigil. The only thing she was wearing was a steel collar, and her whole body was covered with scratches, cuts, and burns. After receiving all the medical help she needed, the girl told the detectives about this shocking story. On March 19, 1999, Cynthia, who worked as a prostitute, was looking for a client at one of the stops in the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico. A man came up to her, introduced himself as a police officer in civilian clothes, and arrested her for prostitution. He handcuffed her and put her in the back seat of his car. Then he drove to a trailer that was parked in the middle of nowhere. The things Cynthia experienced during the next 3 days couldn't be imagined even in her worst nightmares. David and his accomplice Cindy Hendy tied the girl to a chair that resembled a gynecological chair, and after that, they tortured and abused her for 3 days. They had a whole toolbox consisting of dozens of instruments they used to torture and inflict extreme pain. Before that, the torturers showed the girl a cassette with all the abuse another woman suffered in that same chair. According to Cynthia, they wanted to give her a vivid idea of what was going to happen to her very soon. There were also instructions on that cassette where Ray explained to the victim how she was supposed to behave. The girl could only address him as sir, and his female companion as madam. She also couldn't speak without permission. Here's only a bit of information provided by the serial killer. This recording is created on July 23, 1993, as a general consultation footage for women kept in our possession. The information I'm going to give you is based on my experience with captives that spans several years. If we make any significant changes in the way our procedures are conducted in the future, this recording will be updated. You're obviously here against your will, completely helpless, don't know where you are, and have no idea what's going to happen to you. You're either very scared or very angry. I'm sure you already tried to free your wrists and ankles and realized you can't do it. Now, you're just waiting to see what's going to happen next. Cynthia pointed out that Ray was saying all of those horrible things very calmly and confidently, as if torturing and killing women were just his normal everyday activities. The murderer also promised to kill the girl after all the abuse, just like he had killed all of his other victims. On the third day of horrible tortures, Cynthia got a chance to escape. Ray went to work and his accomplice stayed to keep an eye on her victim. She accidentally left the keys that opened the shackles near the place where the girl was chained. Cynthia managed to use that moment to reach the keys and free her arms. When Hendy noticed it, she tried to stop the girl, but the victim was faster. Cynthia grabbed a kitchen icebreaker tool that was lying around and drew it into her tormentor's neck. Cynthia got out of the trailer completely naked. There was a metal collar on her neck, and she had heavy chains around her wrists. She desperately knocked on the door of a nearby trailer and got lucky. The owner was home and opened the door. After hearing what the girl had to say, he called the police. The police immediately started to search for David Parker Ray and his accomplice, but there was no one in the trailer. The torturers were trying to search for their escaped victim in all the neighboring areas. That's where they got arrested. When the investigators entered the trailer, they were completely shocked. The van looked completely inconspicuous from the outside, but on the inside, there was an actual torture chamber. There were hundreds of torture tools hung on the walls. There was a chair in the middle that resembled a gynecological chair. It had straps used to immobilize their victims, and there was a huge mirror on the ceiling. The poor girls could see everything that was happening to them in that mirror. Besides all that, they found 643 discs and cassettes with perverted content. Some of those recordings were made by Ray himself and his girlfriend. The police started playing the disc that was in the DVD player at the time, and they saw extremely disturbing and shocking images. The recording that lasted 81 minutes featured Ray ceaselessly torturing a woman and highly enjoying the whole process. Later, the police found out that the cost of the trailer was $100,000, and all the sadistic tools they used to torture women cost at least $24,000. The van was also completely soundproof, and that's why no one could hear the victims scream. Ray himself called his creation a toy box. It only served to confirm the fact that all of his inconceivable tortures and murders were just funny entertainment in his eyes. After Ray's arrest, the police found out that the torturer's 31-year-old daughter, Jessica Ray, also helped him commit all those horrifying crimes. It was her who brought another victim to her father, her friend Kelly Garrett, on July 24, 1996. That fateful evening, Kelly had a fight with her husband and decided to go out and play pool with Jessica. The torturer's daughter added a sleep mixture into her drink and brought her to her father's trailer, where he abused her 2 days in a row. After that, Ray cut the poor girl's throat and left her on the side of the road. By some miracle, the girl survived, and the abusers could have gotten arrested much sooner. But they got extremely lucky. Neither her husband nor the police believed the girl. Her husband thought Kelly cheated on him after their fight and presented this story about her abduction as an excuse. But what about the police? Why didn't the law enforcement officers conduct an investigation after this outrageous story? Here, we're getting closer to the answer to the question of why this group of sadists could abduct and kill women for years without getting noticed by the police. It was because David Parker Ray pumped all of his victims with extremely potent substances. The girls either couldn't remember at all what happened to them, or their memories were too blurry and haphazard because of this. That's what happened to Kelly. She couldn't remember any details, but knew exactly who abducted her and who tortured her. After Ray and his accomplices were arrested, one more victim came to the police. Her name was Angelica Montano, She was the killer's acquaintance and came over to his place once to ask for some pie ingredients. Ray tied her up, pumped her with his signature heavy substances, and tortured her, and then let her go. The police found Angelica when she was walking naked through a desert, but once again, no one started to further investigate this situation because the woman couldn't remember any details about her abduction. Her words were finally taken seriously the second time, and her testimony helped to solidify the case against the torturers. Understanding that it was impossible to lie any further, Ray's accomplice Cindy admitted to everything. She agreed to tell the investigators about all the murders she was aware of. Ray himself said that he had one more accomplice, his friend Dennis Roy Yancey. After the arrest, he admitted to killing a girl named Mary Parker after Ray and his daughter tortured her for several days. The court found this case extremely complicated. Not only all the identified victims could barely remember any details of their abduction, but the investigators also didn't know even an approximate number of his victims. They couldn't see any logic in David Parker Ray's action. He let some of the girls go, but killed others. The trial continued for almost 2 years. During all that time, the investigators couldn't prove Ray's involvement in any of the murders. The FBI was convinced that the torturers killed more than 60 women, but the killers themselves didn't want to disclose any details of their horrifying crimes. Even the torturers' diaries, where they described the murders of at least 50 women that were found by the police, didn't provide any help. The main problem was that the police couldn't find the bodies of all other victims. But even if they did, there would be another problem. The murders would have to be directly connected to Ray, and it's almost impossible to establish a connection without any hard evidence. In the end, David Parker Ray was sentenced to 224 years of prison for abduction, torture, and abuse. His accomplice Cindy Hendy was sentenced to 36 years, but was released on parole on July 15, 2019. But the sentence of Parker Ray's daughter was what astonished people the most. She was sentenced to just 2.5 years of prison and was on probation for 5 years. After being released, she wrote a book called My Father's Lair. David himself spent the least amount of time in prison. After being sentenced on May 28, 2002, the sadist died from a heart attack when he was 62 years old. His death meant that the investigators lost his last hope to find out more details about the crimes he committed. Most likely, we'll never find out how many people were abducted and murdered by these killers. But even the information we have is enough to say that David Parker Ray is one of the most violent serial killers to ever live. His story also makes you think about the fact that so many horrors could be happening right under our very noses, but go unnoticed by everyone.